So literally, through the streets of East London, across East London, starting from Redbridge to Tower Hamlets, and from Tower Hamlets to Newham, and Newham to Tower Hamlets. So East London, and including Waltham Forest. So for the last nearly 50 years, I've been transporting lorry loads and van loads of newspapers and magazines. And I've been doing this almost on average, every 18 months or 2 years on average. And all these newspapers have been accompanied by the supplements and the magazines. And so I've had to find at very short notice space or spaces to store these. And what happened between July 2012 and October 2012 speeded up the need for emergency storage and transport. And so from July 2012 to now, which is Saturday, the 19th of September 2020, I've had to experience expedition and speed, kind of speeded up, made faster about 1,000 times. And all of that has been done for the sake of getting the evidence, first of all, and starting with the written contents of the newspapers. And those contents have not always been truthful contents, but the truth is not about that. The truth is about my seeing what is and has been in the written copy, and each time everything on every aspect. So what you are watching here in this series is a very abbreviated but representative account and version of what I have seen and what I have understood. Now that is only part of the time, 50 years, but I have done the study for longer than 50 years. Okay. So today we are going to look at the role of this person. What's her name? Suella Braverman. That's a very telling surname she has acquired herself. Now she is the kind of temporary version of a mental slave. She is not anywhere near comparable in the extent of the service to her racist kind of controllers that the official mental slave Trevor Terrible Pealeves has been rendering to his masters and mistresses, of those kind of agendas and narratives that he has been employed and kind of appointed to serve. Two of his mistresses, political mistresses, I say. I don't know any other form of relationship, but his political mistresses have included Polly Toynbee and Hattie Harman. Harman and Polly Toynbee have been openly promoting Trevor Terrible Pealeves. as the reliable mental slave that they could relate to. There have been many reliable mental slaves that have been fashioned after Trevor Terrible Phillips, but that one has been the longest lasting. And the role that he has played and is playing, including in today's times, in defending Winston Churchill and attacking people of all backgrounds, especially anti-racists from the Asian background, from African background, and others who have, for legitimate reasons, been demanding accountability. The least that they have been demanding is accountability by the racists. And Churchill has been targeted for the extent of damage he did in his racist decisions, including, as Shashi Tharoor has documented and kind of updated on, the central role that Churchill played in causing the genocidal famine in 1943 that took millions of people's lives in what is now Bangladesh and West Bengal, by diverting resources from the area, away from that area. So what Terrible Phillips is doing is many faceted. One is that he's denying genocide. So it's like denying Holocaust. And he's denying the right to protest against the genocide and denying the right to demand justice for the victims of that genocide that Churchill caused. That is according to Shashi Tharoor and others. The studies that Shashi Tharoor and others have made, and a number in addition to what Tharoor has done, others have studied in Indian institutions the role that Churchill played in that particular genocidal famine created in Bengal. Now, that was only years before the British, quote, withdrew from the subcontinent, which was like 4 years later. So what he did was quite easily a part of the parting shot he was dealing to the colonized country, like he was teaching a lesson, in addition to whatever other motives he might have had. So today in the Times in London, today, that is 19th of September 2020, the Times has given 2 pages space to a piece byline to the Trevor Terrible Phillips, singing the praise of Churchill, and doing so by attacking African and Asian people and others of all decent kind of mind who are equally outraged by the role that Churchill played in that particular genocidal kind of starvation and kind of hunger and famine that he imposed. Now, Suella Braverman hasn't done anything like that, like what Trevor Terrible Phillips has done, but she has done almost as much, kind of blaming the people who oppose the agendas of the right and of the racists. And this is the, obviously, Nick Cohen piece in the Observer last Sunday. So it will be a week in a few hours since this was published. Now, he's saying in the headline that she was ultra loyalist. And Nick Cohen doesn't say anything about her being a mental slave. He doesn't say that. He doesn't even go anywhere near that. And when Nick Cohen wrote the pieces, 2 pieces in The Spectator a few years ago, just before the election, kind of petition against Lutfur Rahman was filed. In one of the ones, the second one, I think, because he wrote one and then it was replied to in Lutfur Rahman's name, but written by somebody else, written by one or more than one white person. Because there is no one in the kind of cabal of Bangladeshi kind of sponsors of Lutfur Rahman who could write one paragraph comparable to that. That is a fact. So Lutfur Rahman's kind of statements were written by a number of white persons that he hired and he kind of sought the advice of. So Lutfur Rahman was, in the second of the 2 pieces Nick Cohen wrote in The Spectator, Lutfur Rahman was described as sly. As I said in the last kind of discussion about Lutfur Rahman and Nick Cohen's use of the word sly in the Siloti language and using the particular gender, that could be translated, would be translated most appropriately as Fungafua. It doesn't mean he's a bastard, but that is the word that is in the Siloti colloquial, and that would be the translation of sly. And what happened with the piece that Nick Cohen wrote after Lutfur Rahman's so-called reply left open all the questions about Lutfur Rahman's misconduct and corruption. Because in the report that the election commissioner, Richard Morey, published on the 23rd of April 2015, the date when he also declared Lutfur Rahman banned from public office for 5 years. The word corrupt or the form corruption, these appear at least 50 times. And this was one of the, in fact, the main reason why I oppose the post of executive elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. Because I anticipated, and I still assert the accuracy of that anticipation, that anyone who would get in that post would disgrace the community, bring the community into disrepute, and behave corruptly, and would be a crook. Now, in the Solicitors Regulation Authority's ruling or list of allegations against Lutfur Rahman, ratified by the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, there are 2 things. One is Solicitors Regulation Authority, SRA, and the other is the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, SDT. In the SRA list of allegations against Lutfur Rahman, dishonesty was a leading item. And so all of the allegations were proven in the Solicitor Disciplinary Tribunal's procedure based on the SRA's allegations against Lutfur Rahman. And in my comment on the Spectator's website that was published, the Spectator must have removed those comments that I published. I said words to the effect that Lutfur Rahman knows of the criminality going on in Tower Hamlets, because I have told him so, and I've given him evidence that that was going on. Now, I can say today, again, as an update, that despite the fact that he was a student of a group of my students, I mean, that kind of grand student, if you like, was not aware of the depth of his stupidity and ingratitude. Because on the one hand, he praises me or praised me as the most deserving person to be the first mayor or the first MP or whatever from this community. And at the same time, he betrays the most basic of the obligations based on his admitted knowledge of my own integrity and honesty and high standards and long campaign for the community and its standards and its dignity. So what I'm saying about Nick Cohen, Suella Braverman, The Spectator, and Luther Roman is this: that Nick got this particular piece wrong. It is nowhere near as comprehensive and as detailed and as biting as it should be and could be based on her behavior. As I said, she is a kind of, if Terrible P-Leaves is a nephew Tom, then she is a niece Tom, or she's a Thomasina, or whatever the feminine is for the Tom. And there are too many niece Toms or Thomasinas, mental slaves, floating on various kind of boats, career boats in this country at the expense of the community. Now, the community is not represented by any kind of big foundation forum with big premises or anything. Community is me, people like me, who are defending the universal values of the people and against all odds, all obstructions. We haven't got premises, we haven't got offices. So therefore, that is the reference to my van loads of newspapers and magazines being transported across East London over 50 years. Yes? And we shall come to chapter and verse of that in due course on this channel. Now, all the references that I make, like the references I've been making now about Nick Cohen's piece about Suella Braverman, and my pieces on the Spectator in response to Nick Cohen first writing about Luther Rahman and then replying to his reply, so-called, all of those are based on the contents of other publications or other sources. I don't say anything that is not sourced or sourceable. And I don't say anything because, as I have been saying, because I know that somebody has done personal damage to my work. That is not the motive. I only say anything about anyone on the record entirely based on evidence and substance and substantiation. So the people who know where I have been storing these magazines, newspapers, articles, and other data and the storages also know that I have gone out of my way physically and socially in terms of sacrificing social kind of rest and relaxation and all the other things to get hold of sources and source materials, evidence. And the reason is very early on, when I was beginning to be aware of awareness, knowledge, and consciousness, I picked up from the elders that I overheard in the household where I grew up one theme that the elders referred to most frequently, that in the community, and I'm talking about now the part of the place is now part of Bangladesh, but it wasn't Bangladesh, it was East Pakistan, and before that, of course, it was part of the occupied, British occupied Indian Empire. So the people would visit our household, and the culture being as it was and as it still is, I think, the visitors were mainly men and talking to male members of our family. And they would have a kind of long conversation, and I would overhear their main conversation. And the main conversation was not about any party, not about any particular dispute or event, but the characteristics among the people being that people are mainly unreliable, that people were dishonest, that people were selfish, that people were unreliable and could not be trusted, and that they were ignorant and mean-minded and petty and all the rest of it. So those overheard kind of complaints and laments and observations contributed to my thinking, now what am I going to do with whatever I can do in relation to other people and in relation to society? Because an idea of society had already been developing alongside these other conversations. So I thought that the best thing I could do possibly would be to reverse this and to set an example on each of these and to say that I'm reliable, I'm not a liar, and I'm not selfish, and I'm not petty. So these are the things that I developed inside my own mind after hearing the completely consistent complaint among these members of the groups that gathered in our household and spoke for sometimes the whole day, with breaks for prayers and breaks for kind of meals and so forth. And this is what I've been doing. So any conflict that I have had with anyone, absolutely anyone, has been to do with the accuracy and authenticity of things, not about me wanting money from anyone. If there has been, that would be completely a one-off thing about covering the cost of buying newspapers or something. Now think about that. That is how important and how central newspapers and magazines have been in my treatment of those. So I'm diagnosing, not by accident. It's a completely main occupation, looking at the papers and looking at the contents of the papers and looking at the impact of the contents of the papers and who controls them, who owns them. All of these happened before Mark Zuckerberg was born, and probably Jeff Bezos was born. Of course, Gates was born already, I think, but the others were not even born. Could apply also to Elon Musk. So the contents of these newspapers and magazines have been worth more. Contents have been worth in the sense of what they related to, what they affected, and what they represented, have been worth more, much more than the combined the combined known wealth of all these 4 billionaires put together. Because as I speak, to get hold of one piece of evidence would cost thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds, and yet I wouldn't get hold of the same identical total copy, even if 100,000 pounds were to be available to cover the cost of collecting that. Have a think about this, whoever you are watching this or reading this or understanding this or hearing this, either live or at a later date. Now, this is the time, this is 24 minutes, I think. Is it 24 minutes? Yes, 24 minutes to 10 p.m. GMT in London on Saturday, the 19th of September 2020. And we are still talking about the newspapers of Saturday. But I am, of course, going back a week and talking about the Observer of Sunday last. Now, what is happening in the context of the access to newspapers and why I decided to have my own newspapers every day? Because there is no place anywhere in East London, or for that matter, anywhere in the whole of the UK, where you can get hold of newspapers that you want to read. Not only can you not do that, you cannot even get that even in the membership of the restricted membership clubs, because they're all time related. So that's not the same thing as having access at home. You need the access all the time so that you can refer to the contents and you can discuss and you can analyze and you can relate to and you can refer to these. That is the demand imposed on me by my own agenda that I set very early on in my life. So in order to consider all aspects of the evidence, I had to have access to all the newspapers available. I mean, as I was beginning, one of my then schoolmates or classmates, let's say, who had the most contacts with me at that time, and the reason why he was so much in contact with me was because of the diversity and extensive interest I was showing in newspapers. And he wanted to know what I knew. And at one stage, he invited me to his home, a mile or so away from my home. And he had his relations or friends who came to join the conversation.